and welcome to the Infinite Improvisation Podcast, Adventures in Music and Creativity. And I am Steve Treseler in Seattle, joined by my co-host Lauren Best in Ontario. Hey, Lauren.
Hi, pleasure to be here again.
Yeah. So this is our third of 5 mini episodes on the how to improvise, how to create original ideas. And this one may be one of the most practical, hands-on, here is how to do it. I got a quote for you, Lauren, that is, I'm a real believer that creativity comes from limits, not freedom. And that is a quote by comedian Jon Stewart. You may know, the host of, for many years, of The Daily Show on Comedy Central. Is that something you get up in Canada too?
Yeah.
Okay. But, so we'll be talking about this concept of limitations in various disciplines. So, in the case of Jon Stewart, The Daily Show, you think of them writing for the show, they're just cracking jokes back and forth, but they've got a deadline. They've got to produce something every day, and they had a very clear, repeatable system to allow the creativity to happen. And so we'll be talking about self-imposed limitations today and doing some demonstrations that we want to take some musical risks or artistic risks here live on the show. So even before we get to the music, there are many ways that we use self-imposed limitations, that the tools in our toolkit, we're restricting what we're using in order to generate new ideas. So, kick that back at you, Lauren. What are some types of limitations that you've worked with throughout either music or writing or other artistic practices?
Yeah, well, as you said, self-imposed limitations. What I thought of right away was how sometimes we don't consciously think of what the limitations actually are that we are assuming. So sometimes, we always have some kind of limitation, and I think sometimes thinking more actively about it and self-imposing additional limitations can also help us look at what limitations we have in place that we are taking for granted or assuming or not necessarily thinking about actively or realizing. And what comes to mind there, right, is using our instrument in non-traditional ways, or, when we're guiding others in music, right? And particularly I'm thinking with children, right? We can tell them how, what those limits are with the instrument, right? What's the range of possible expression before they're possibly breaking the instrument. So there's kind of conscious limitations and unconscious limitations. So of course I think of length is almost is often one of the main limitations, right? Because playing a 3-minute song is very different than playing a 30-minute song. And with music being experienced temporally, the length we choose can change the experience of it.
Yeah, absolutely. There are, it's interesting to see that, so many unconscious limitations, like the range of, talking about music, the range of what we're able to hear, or you're playing piano, limit of how many fingers we have and how far apart they're spaced on our body. And even if I'm at a jazz session, hey, we're going to play a blues in F, 1, 2, 3, 4. Right away, you've got a kind of a tempo limitation. You've got an idea of what there may be some variance, but what the harmonic progression is going to be. Yeah, so one thing too I think about is writing prompts, creative writing classes. It's not just here's a blank piece of paper and write something, right? You get some kind of, what are some that you've done in your writing practice? Maybe a writing prompt that limits.
Prompts where you choose a random word to start.
Oh, okay.
That's, and that sometimes it can be that's the first line or the first word of the poem, or that could be the title of the poem. And then that word that was randomly selected, kind of everything is coming from that. So often I think the limitation, there's lots of other ways of limitations too, right? You could choose every word in the poem randomly, but then arrange them in a way that, or have certain words that you have to include in the poem. But often I think for writing, it's a jumping off point sometimes. Or
it's brought to mind actually erasure, which we had talked about a bit. Something you could describe for our
Yeah,
folks?
so or in erasure poetry where we're using a text or of some kind that is pre-selected, and we're removing words by erasing them or blacking them out, or maybe cutting them out and rearranging them, like ransom note style. And so then your limitation is like the media and the text that you're using coming into it. And so, I think musically of samples and using samples and then some of the limitation is kind of like what your ingredients are, but then it's also how you alter and change those ingredients as well.
Yeah. And well, also for poetry too, thinking about a haiku, the syllable, and I understand I know little about it, but there's more to it than just the syllable structure. But same thing when you're working within that limitation. It's like, oh, I want to expound and use 1,000 syllables. I'm like, well, no, you have to dial it down, and working within a limitation like that.
Yeah, totally. And with a haiku, we have the 5-7-5, but then with each line, for the 3 lines, and then there's other haiku traditions beyond that. So it's kind of starting to think of how, like, which limitations do we want to include, right? Whether it's just the syllables or whether it's other elements of haiku as well, such as there's a term called the cut word, where at the end of the second line, there's a word that kind of changes the feeling, or I'm probably not describing the definition exactly, but it's called the cut word because there's more to that, and it's a shift that would happen. But many haiku don't have that nowadays.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, limitations before we get to playing some music, but other limitations is a practice that come to mind, like in improv theater games or even sketch comedy, where sometimes the audience will yell out a scenario or a character, or here's a conflict, and then the actors use that to riff off of it. If you've seen Whose Line Is It Anyways, or Whose Line Is It Anyway? Other shows like that.
And then
go ahead.
Within that too, there's like limitations that we will like often keep, like they're staying on the stage for the most part. But then if we choose to go outside of those limitations, it can be a surprising moment that can be really effective, but it's usually not used very often, so like coming out into the audience or bringing up the house lights and sometimes more than others in some shows, but like we have choices about how much to kind of break outside that,
or bringing audience members on stage like you were talking about earlier. Or some of those limitations we keep. If it's a 7:00 show, I'm like, surprise, it actually started at 5:30. You missed it. We broke out of that limitation. Like, oh. Another one that comes to mind too is some of those. Think of like a cooking reality show where I saw one where there's the master chefs and the contestants, and they had to make a dessert, and the secret ingredient was tuna fish. So they had to make some kind of tuna fish dessert, and it's not, if they had all their devices, they would have not found this, I guess, this angle of creativity, and someone came up with some pretty amazing dishes. Apparently, I don't know, I couldn't taste them, but
yeah, it adds a huge amount of novelty and of challenge, and it kind of gets us thinking in ways that we wouldn't normally. Like, I'm guessing none of those contestants would have been like, I can't wait for the tuna fish challenge, but then once they were in it, like it I'm sure presented new and different possibilities. And
it shows, as we also talked about last season, the difference between just following a step-by-step recipe rather than being a chef and taking, seeing new possibilities with the ingredients you have, rather than just doing something you've done several times before.
Yeah, totally. And I think that's such a fun thing with limitations when we're working with others, is that like, of course, we could each just create something different and it would be different. Okay, cool. Like, of course it's different. But if we have similar sets of limitations or overlapping limitations, and then to still see how those are different or divergent, or how there's some similarities or overlap, can be part of the fun of working with limitations in a group.
Absolutely. You can think of visual arts, even. I mean, what comes to mind is Picasso's Blue Period as well. That kind of, using limitation of color. What else? My wife does a lot of crafts and fiber arts and painting, among other things. But she has a book that I think is called One Ball of Yarn. It's like projects you can do with your limitation of you've got one leftover ball. What's something you can do with it without having to buy another pile of yarn. Okay, well, let's take this to music. So we're gonna experiment on each other a little bit, and well, here's how I usually frame it. I mean, we've already kind of given it away since the show's about improvisation, but usually I'll just if it works with like, hey, do you want to play a game? Just kind of framing this as a musical game.
I want to play a game.
You gotta play a game. Okay, so you're gonna play a short piece, and this is using the time limitation. So we'll say about maybe 30 seconds to a minute. And we'll have a pitch limitation. So you're only allowed to use the note A on the piano. So you can use A, but you can use any A in any register, and how you play the A's, that's up to you. But you've got a very, very specific pitch limitation. And then when you're done, you're going to play the note D. D for done. And that's how I know it's over.
Alrighty. Those are the only limitations?
Those are the only limitations.
A, 30 seconds, D, done.
Approximately, yeah. And then sort of the challenge of this is like, well, what can we, to be experimenting, but okay, how can we make this interesting? That's the game.
All right, here we go. Thank you.
You can feel all the listeners in the future clapping to this performance. That was awesome. Okay, so what was that experience like with that, working with that limitation?
Well, partway through, I remembered. It occurred to me that I don't really know how long that was. Like, I have a pretty good sense of time, of like how much time has elapsed sometimes, but we all know, right, that like once you start playing, sometimes we have a very mistaken sense of that. And so partway through, I was like, how do I know how much time has passed? Yeah. How close to 30? I know you said 30 seconds to a minute, but I'm like, I wonder how close we're going to get. And as you know, like, you don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole while you're actually... While you're actually,
it's like recording a podcast episode too. These mini episodes have been about 20 minutes, but I'm getting a sneaking little spidey sense this one we may run long today. Awesome. Yeah, exactly. You've got that in the back of your head, but you don't want to let those kind of thoughts distract you too much. But yeah, staying within the limitation, it kind of brings you back.
It's like, how much do we want to like surrender into the moment, or just play in a more like physical way where we're almost trying to be like not plan or not think too much about it, and then how much do we want to actively consider what we're doing and kind of actively coach ourselves or actively make choices. I mean, that's already kind of like like there's different approaches to that, but definitely with the limitations, it's like making sure I actually do the limitations, because if I'm just playing in a more like kind of like physically led way and like trying to sort of clear my mind, then I may not stick with the notes. So I need to remember what you actually said and do it, which sounds simple. Like, it's only 2 notes. That sounds like it should be simple. But we all know we can lose track of things in the moment.
Yeah. And so for these limitations, these aren't necessarily prescriptive rules. I call them like temporary rules for now.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting with that. So I mean, what I heard that kind of kept my attention with that is you were playing with different registers, and the timing and the touch, that you're playing very musical phrases, and the timing and dynamics are keeping my attention. Then the surprise, big low D at the end. It's so what's important about these limitations is how we have to be resourceful in other dimensions, rather than we just have to play one note. That's going to be boring. I'm like, well, with that attitude, it'll be boring. So what can we do to make it not boring, make it interesting? And so this is actually the structure of a piece by. Do you know where I'm going with this? Maybe you know where I'm going with this.
Keep going.
By György Ligeti, the Hungarian-Austrian composer. It's a piano piece that he used very specific pitch limitation. So the first movement of this ricercata is just like this, the note A, and he ends with D, so 2 pitches. And then the next movement is 3 pitches, the next is 4, and then the 11th movement is all 12 pitches. And he's known for having making some self-imposed obstacles and trying to overcome them in his process. So I'm going to play. It's just about 2 minutes long. So I put you on the spot with this, but here's what Ligeti came up with after, I imagine, much consideration. And so here we go. Let's listen to it and kind of see what your thoughts are after experimenting with yourself. Well, there we go.
I just was thinking it's interesting that you said end on D, but you didn't specify like whether I was ending with like a phrase of D or whether I was supposed to end with one D, you know? And I noticed that like in both what I played and the recording, like they were in different registers, but it was like that singular sort of D to end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so what were your impressions on that?
Well, I was thinking about how, like, for different instruments, we'd have such different results, right? Like, because of the range of the piano, but also things to play that are, like, kind of typical on piano, like certain octave jumps that I saw some similarities between the two sort of little pieces. Because some things just kind of appear naturally, right? Whereas if you had the exact same limitations, I'm guessing you might feel, well, of course it would be different in many ways just because of the differences between the instruments.
Yeah, I enjoy doing this one more on piano than on saxophone, where I'm doing octave jumps and trying to keep them in tune and all that. Yeah, I can just you can just grab so much the piano, and I think my approach would be more similar to how you approached it, and then it was really cool to hear that kind of rhythmic hocketed stuff and getting the interlocking grooves and all that was happening. But one thing that jumped out to me too is when he's really pounding in the lower register, you can start to hear more and more harmonics, and the notes kind of split out into this spectral, like a spectrum of notes. So I'm hearing, there's the third overtone. I was hearing some like harmonic sevenths, and that the note A isn't just an A, that it's this collection of other frequencies, and kind of being able to blast it apart. That's kind of one of my favorite moments.
Totally, especially with the damper pedal, like with the damper open, and so you can like really hear everything start to ring. And I was thinking as well how he was playing on an acoustic piano, and for me with the keyboard, especially like with doing one take, not like I mean, I play this fairly often, but I've changed the volume and changed the settings and stuff, and so just how the expression, even with the same instrument or with the same type of instrument on a keyboard versus an acoustic piano, how the results, that's part of the limitations. That's part of what brings out those results.
Very good. Okay, well, I've got another one for you.
For me, you don't play that now.
Oh, my turn to play. Okay, I'll
or no, you could throw another one at me. I was just teasing.
No, you're on the.
I'm in the hot seat.
You're the lab rat. Yeah, it's for more what I've got you at the piano. Yeah, similar. So another pitch limitation. So this is, you're going to play do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. You're going to play just the notes of the C major scale in order. So 1 C, 1 D, 1 E. And then you can just kind of continue. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, re, mi, fa, sol, and just continue. But again, you can change the register. So you can play C up here and then D down there. So they're in order. The pitches are in order, but you're free to move registers.
Okay.
Does that make, you'll play some C, some D, some E, some F, some G, and just keep going, and then you're done when you're done.
But
Does that make sense?
each could repeat. Like I can play a C more than once, or it's one tone of C. It can last however long it wants, but not C repeated.
Exactly. One event of C, or one articulation of C, and it can hold. But that's the new pitch limitation.
And about the same length?
Sure, yeah. About up to a minute, but don't let that get inside your head. If you get in the zone, you can go a little bit longer, I guess.
Okay. Okay, one more thing. Can I play more than one of the note at once? Like simultaneous, like, or... I'm not trying to. I'm not. This is always me. Like me in school was like, "Excuse me."
Yeah, I was gonna say, what were you like as a kid, or were you out? Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, what time is the flow scheduled for? I will go with the flow.
Yeah. No, I'm not actually touching.
Yeah, I can double notes.
I see. Are you? I'll leave that up to you.
Okay. I'll leave it there.
All right.
That was tough.
So that was more challenging than the other one?
That was, a lot. I think I actually broke the rule once and like accidentally repeated something because it was just, how do I put it? Well, I felt like I had to use a lot of my brain making sure I obeyed the rules. You know, like, even though it's a fairly simple rule, you know, our brains all work a little differently, right? Like, some of us will find some rules easier to follow than others.
Especially
and that's
if you want to
kind
start following your intuition and then,
and I can't. Yeah. And like earlier when I was saying like, we all know we can get lost in the music. And I think we all know that. But I think I'm curious to see if you'd agree with this. Like, as music teachers, I think we really see that exemplified, because we'll see it like, you know, we'll be like, okay, repeat this like 3 times. And then the student plays it like 8 times because they were just like, they lose count, like, because their brains are somewhere else. And, you know, but for some folks, like, you know, some things are easier than others to keep in mind or to get out of our minds. And I don't know, that felt a little weird because I was trying to I was trying to like let myself go from it enough that it would, I guess that's partially because I didn't want it to sound super like I was playing what you told me to play. So I was actually trying to distance myself from that limitation. Whereas if I played things that were like just quick runs and stuff where like I just like let that flow more, that might have been easier.
So I mean, some of these limitations you'll try and they'll just kind of flow. I'm like, oh, this is such a great, suddenly this music is just flowing out. And others can be very challenging and frustrating. And then that's part of the work is, okay, well, how can I work with this limitation and make it happen? But, you know, in reality, you can always change the limitation. Or, this got me going in a certain direction and I really want to, it may inspire you to go in another direction. And at some point, if you just bag the limitation and then just go, maybe that can set the stage for creating something new. Just starting with a limitation, letting it go somewhere else. And then, I mean, that's what we're after.
Yeah,
anyway.
like I felt like I was also really thinking like a piano player. You might disagree with me on that, but in that, I was like, well, what if I just play the limitation as my bass notes and then like I sing with that, or I play like a different melody, like, you know, like I wasn't in that. So I was trying to, you know, like it's different playing that and thinking like, oh, I'm trying to like play this as like the piece, right? Versus if I was like, oh, I'm going to play with that limitation like as my bass line and then I'll record that and come back to it, I would have a really different approach than kind of the pressure being on of like, here's the whole thing, like, you know, recorded.
The whole world's going to hear it if they download this episode. So do you think that would be a challenging one to sing? I'm not going to ask you to do.
If I was changing octaves, I guess. I was thinking about that though, because like if I just probably wouldn't change octaves doing it, but if I just like kept it sequential and then like changed things about the tone and timbre and the, you know, the dynamics and the articulation of what I was doing. Yeah, I was thinking that about the other one too, like of the just sing A and then sing D. And I was like, it's funny because that's so easy to do on piano, but to ask me just sing A's and then sing a D, I would like be so frustrated, you know? Whereas if you asked me to improvise with a lot of crescendos, I would much rather sing that than play that on the piano. And that's actually a limitation I've been thinking of a lot lately, how for the piano or the guitar, right, like our tone, like it's a state of constant decay, you know? Totally. Whereas with wind instruments and with our voice, it's a much different mindset for how we're actually like approaching creating and sustaining a column of air.
Sure. Anyway, with this is also a structure for a piece of music. But speaking of it's Arvo Pärt, Estonian composer. It's called Solfeggio, and it's a choral piece. And I think when I first heard it, I had no idea that was the limitation. And the lyrics are do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do.
Okay.
So check this out. And I just, he's one of my favorite composers, so I just love this. wanted to stop it. But anyway, like, have you heard that before? I'm curious.
No, I hadn't, but it sounded beautiful. And it made me like the overlapping part. I was while I was playing, I did a little bit of that, and I was like, is this against the like, you know what I mean? And so what I found interesting about hearing that, right, it was like those longer sustained pitches, which I mean, I mentioned like just the differences in terms of voice versus piano versus even just like an organ sound or something. I would have approached it differently with like an organ sound, but also that like the time limitation of this felt like it was like in some ways my primary consideration. You know what I mean? Because like that would have been so like if I have 3 minutes to think about things and to kind of get into some ideas and to try things out, I'm going to take a different approach than 30 seconds. Yeah, but I wasn't at the time. I wouldn't have said that was the most like difficult constraint or whatever. But then like hearing that other example, it made me think more about how the timing, we can kind of forget about it, but it's actually the length is a pretty major thing, right? And people really notice if songs are like if it's wildly outside of their expectations.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like the shorter limitation, especially if I'm doing workshops, and it feels a little less intimidating to do a short one. But if you're kind of wanting to let something fully develop, the short one can feel like it gets in the way. Mm-hmm. That's amazing. I'm kind of a sucker for those diatonic clusters, just that harmony, the pretty dissonance and getting away from, when we're, people are working on scales, like, oh, doing scales are so boring. I'm like, well, it doesn't sound boring if you do it like that. I know Stephen Nachmanovich, author of Free Play, who I keep bringing up, but he has a passage in there about rainbow scales, which is playing, working on some kind of technical thing or scales, but changing something about the dynamics and the pacing and the tone color and all of this to make it a musical experience and something creative rather than a dry technical drill.
Well, and the notes and the tempo are just one of like so many elements that we can change with the scale, and it's also like where we direct our attention, and especially when it comes to technique and just being, taking some time to really experience things differently by slowing them down. It's interesting because I would say that generally, like those like, the overlapping tones and the clusters and getting lots of harmonies going, I would say that's normally how I would like naturally explore. Like that would be like generally like more of my like instinct, but like because of the short time limitation and because of like you can use any note, I really felt like I had to spread around the keyboard, which I didn't, right? Like I could have just stayed in one range. That was just like one choice. However, it's interesting. Sometimes like having the limitations, I felt like I needed to use a broader range within what I could choose than I maybe normally would.
So are you saying you want to try it again, or are we done?
No.
That's not
because
now
I've talked too much about it. Like now if I tried it again, I would have to really take some time. Well, I mean, you know what I mean.
I guess I can be in the hot seat now. And maybe both of those had pitch limitations. So I think it might be interesting to, I guess you're putting me in the hot seat, but we can kind of move away from pitch. Like what are some other types of limitations that,
well,
we can try that. So I got a saxophone here. So
I'm thinking of like how mean I want to be. So okay, the like, and actually this isn't mean at all, but the like what the poet in me and the sort of the singer lyricist in me would suggest is to have your choose a piece of text that you can see around you, and then your rhythm limitation is the speech patterns of that block of text.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Yeah. That's what comes to mind right away. And then pitches.
So it's an instrumental version of, so it's like text setting sort of.
Yeah.
Melodically. Okay.
Yeah. And like the text you can, like it could be a list of ingredients, or it could be Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
choose your text in advance. Don't pick something. Don't choose your text while you play.
Okay. Okay.
And do you want another limitation on top of that, or is that enough?
I could do another one on top of that. But that's enough as well. But I can.
Well, I mean, how about we leave it at that, and we'll see what other limitations kind of emerge maybe from that, right? Because like.
Okay, here we go.
Cool. I could definitely hear the speech in it, eh?
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, what did you notice?
What did it bring to? Well, I don't know. Oh,
You'll need to bring your mic back up from the sax.
Yep, talking level. I really, I enjoy doing that, and I've done similar things before. And that one, I was. Well, but before I tell you what the words were, maybe what did it? I don't know. What did it bring to mind as a listener?
I was glad that we didn't choose pitch limitations because, like I really heard the speech in it, but yet like the melodic elements weren't necessarily speech-like. And I think sometimes if we choose one pitch, it can have kind of like a just like that monotone speech vibe. And so I felt like it was like I felt the speechness, but yet it feels a little removed from that because the pitches are. Well, maybe someone would speak with pitches like that, but we're less less tied to that.
Yeah. So I was actually reading my Zoom menu off the bottom of the window. So mute, stop video, security, participants, chat, share screen, pause, stop recording. So I was pausing after pause. So I was doing some text painting, I guess, then breakout rooms, reactions, apps, whiteboards, more. End. Yeah. And the end was the end of the piece. So some of those I was playing with it, but also just trying to think about just our love-hate relationship with video conferencing and how it's awesome we do things like, podcasts across the continent, but still, how much time we spent on Zoom. So a little bit of anger in there, but,
And did you find, were you feeling the melody of the words, or were those feelings separate for you? Because as you said participants, I think, or you said you said it with a very clear inflection.
I think a couple of those I was trying to sing how I played it or something. I was thinking about the shape and the emphasis of each word. Sometimes as instruments we fall into we just fall into a steady tempo, security, or security participants, and make it metered when it's not, right? Because our speech, if we come up with the rhythms of what we're actually saying, it's very it would be very tough to put into a traditional time signature. Those are strange rhythms, but they're very natural when we're speaking. So I was trying to pay attention to that and leave some space between each button. I was pre-hearing some of those melodies and shapes, but that's
well, and by leaving space between each button, it's almost you turned the menu into a graphic score in a sense, right? You had
exactly.
the visuals were part of what was guiding your pacing.
Yeah,
it sounds like
that's great. And I find text can be a really good entry point for some instrumental folks who are starting with a poem, choosing a poem, and then kind of finding which words have emphasis on which syllables, and how can we shape a melody or theme around that, and that often gives someone something to go with. So if I want to compose something and I don't know where to start and I don't have any ideas, like, well, let's start with some text. Let's start with a poem, and that can really help people get moving. So you were wondering how nice you wanted to be. Was that a nice one, or was that a mean one?
I don't know. I think that was a nice one.
You could do a not nice one. And
you chose your text.
Yeah.
And you chose text fairly freely, so I was, you know what I mean? It wasn't, I did not at all pre-select menus. Do you want to do another one, or did that lead somewhere for you in terms of, did that bring anything else to mind? For you?
There's a lot. I mean, we could do a whole thing on graphic scores, and that's a whole other thing. Now, let's maybe do something that's totally different. But again, I like shying away from the pitch limitations, which I love using, but so much. Any folks out there in the jazz world, so much like, oh, what scale do I play on this? So people are thinking so much on like, what note do I play in this situation? So, and I was sticking you with pitch limitations. So something different.
I was thinking of like atmosphere, mood, emotional quality as a limitation that I think often folks who aren't playing music all the time don't necessarily consider some of these limitations might not be top of mind, or they might kind of think of speed as like one thing and like not necessarily like tease out like like tempo and density and like and changes in speed, and like those things don't necessarily pop to mind for people. But I find that even people who aren't playing music very often will have ideas of like emotional qualities, right? I think it's actually sometimes easier for people who are like playing music less often to be like, oh, I'm just gonna play this thing that is emotional, whereas as musicians we're like, what does that mean?
Yeah. Right. And then the emotion, if you're saying something's joyful or suspenseful, we can just sometimes go right at it, but some other limitations start falling into place, whether it's our association with a soundtrack or other music. So a limitation like that can just automatically bring to mind many more. Well, should we use... Did you want to use the menu, or?
Well, I had an idea, but it's again, this is a very like throwing you into like a theatrical situation as opposed to being nice and choosing simple menu items.
Yeah. That's
which
fine.
is like a conversation that is going well. It's another speech-based thing. I don't know,
Okay.
but not that the sounds have to sound like speech, but the vibe is a conversation that you think is going well and you realize is not going well and becomes increasingly more awkward.
Right on.
I was like, get me out of here. It's too much conflict.
Hey, that was fun. And as I was playing, I became aware of the structure the new limitations I made for myself. It became like, that was fun. I mean, either of these are not things that I would have not played exactly those things in any other content, but it's still like, oh, this makes sense. It's like getting the juices flowing. I wouldn't have played those same phrases as I was looking at the zoom buttons versus so I was thinking, to make it a conversation, I mean, some call and response phrasing, obviously the two different registers for the two different voices, that's kind of low hanging fruit for that. And And the conversational thing, I mean, it brought to mind some, like blues phrasing, and there's a lot of just call and response and some of the jazz and blues that I play. So it kind of started there, and it very much started in the pitch, it wasn't on purpose. It started in a minor kind of, minor, I guess it was a Dorian pitch limitation. I was kind of, but then I started straying away from it for the tension. And then I started, I actually wasn't planning on it. I was just going to start with the call and response. And then other pitches started creeping in that were more dissonant. Mm-hmm. And then I started changing the timbre and making it edgier, and then doing the split tones and just making it, I wasn't planning on making it that much conflict. But that's just kind of where the conversation went. But as I was doing it, I was aware of like, oh, there's a spectrum of going from consonance to dissonance, and from like a mellow to an edgy tone quality. So there's like a slider that was going this way, and it was getting more dense too. It was more sparse to more dense. So it was weird being aware of those, but it came up more intuitively. And then I was just kind of like, oh, here's the things I'm playing with as I'm doing it.
Yeah, totally. And what occurred to me was that, just that there's like, if you play that again, you might try to take a similar interpretation, but you might take like a different interpretation, and we would likely still like have a sense of how that conversation went. Or I wondered, I mean, like conversation kind of implies some kind of call and response, but I didn't know whether you would take it to mean like I'm hearing one half of the conversation, like, you know, like I'm hearing like someone on their, like talking on their phone, and I'm hearing one half of it. Right. So like there was, yeah, there's a choice there too. And as you're saying, like what, like how that contrast changes, or like how like, yeah, the energy of it becoming less consonant can go in different directions, because something that was sparse at the end still would have had a feeling of it being like less cohesive, right? But it was like even though it was an opposite choice, and it would have had a different feeling at the end, it still kind of would have like communicated like that scene in a way.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I just kind of ran with it, the kind of the theatrical novelty, like it just turned into an explosion. Yeah. So it was kind of funny. But what might be interesting is something that, a conversation not going well doesn't have to be that violent. It could just be, like, imagine an awkward first date that you can tell is not going well, and you're trying to exit the stage left, and like, oh, my friend's calling me, I gotta, hold on. See, you know, that might even be more interesting of a thing, where it's like, oh, it's going, and then something is not quite right, and then there's that tension in the air that's not the kind of in-your-face tension that I was going for.
And the other thing I thought of while you were doing it was that what I love about limitations is that, like, that's a pretty, like, complex thing to try to communicate in a way, right? Like, compared to, like, very sort of like straightforward limitations that don't have kind of like this theatrical element to it. And yet I think if we gave someone like, you know, like I was gonna say like a pencil and a glass, or a wood block and a mallet, give them a more traditional instrument, but that they could also communicate some stuff, even though it's non-pitched, and even though, like, you know, and someone who isn't necessarily used to making these interpretations, despite the fact that it's this kind of complex theatrical thing, like, there's lots we could do with that, whether it's someone like yourself with a lot of experience, or whether, you know, it's someone who's just been handed a percussion instrument that isn't normally an instrument. And on the other side of, so we can work with that sort of very open-ended and kind of complex thing, but yet like really simple, clear limitations that don't necessarily have these more like abstract or story-based ideas can also work really well for people, whether they're people who are really experienced or less experienced. And I love that. I think it's a similar structure for how we might think about it, but yet it's actually quite flexible.
Yeah, and musically, when I'm working with kids, I often do some non-musical themes, like what you're having me do. And so that falls, I guess, under program music, where there's some non-musical element, you know, when I have groups of kids, or adults. I say kids, but I do the same thing with, you know, music majors in college and adults in groups, like a game like Guess the Animal. So I was just doing a check-in with a group of middle school kids, and I had each of them, and, you know, you're going to play a solo improvisation in front of everybody. I didn't do that. I just had them do an impression of their pet, or if they didn't have a pet, their favorite animal. And they just had fun, you know, right on the fly, doing impressions of of animals. So in certain situations, like when you gave me that scene of the conversation not going well, that can really be a great jumping off point, or thinking of a soundtrack. But then there's the more, I believe it's called absolute music, where it's just the music is on its own. It's not representing something else. It's the music. So when I'm having you, like the limitation with the A and the D, or sometimes they can be more technical limitations, and then you have to make the story happen. And different people, I think, react to those in different ways.
So when you do guess the animal, do you like when some kid who's like me is like, does it need to be the animal's voice, or can it be other sounds the animal makes? Do you specify? Or does that come up? Do you find?
Well, it does, because they go, well, how am I supposed to make the sound of a rabbit? It doesn't make sound, So or this animal doesn't make a sound. Say it. So it could. I say that it could be, if they ask, that it could be an impression of the sound the animal makes, or it could be the soundtrack for an animal doing something, or the theme song for the animal, or something like that. So you can.
Yeah, I had piano students doing this, and I think I told you that one of my students played a colony of ants.
Yeah.
And like he explained it, and it totally jived, and it totally made sense, but it was, it wasn't the literal sound of the ants. Yeah. Although I got a video of an ant eating this tiny little caterpillar. Got right up close and got like the video of the mandibles. So maybe we'll have to do a soundtrack for that.
Yeah, that'll be a soundtrack for that.
We've done the colony of ants.
I did a guess the animal. Some of these games that I often do with kids, I did with a group of improvising musicians of the Game Symphony Ensemble. I did that on my birthday at the Royal Room. But we did a version of Guess the Animal where we were trying to do some like even sketch comedy things, where we had people from the audience drawing graphic scores or telling jokes or reading stories, but we did a round of Guess the Animal, and someone from the crowd whispered in our ear that we had to play armadillo, and we did it, and someone guessed it. That was like a highlight.
Yeah, totally. When it's bang on, but especially for armadillo.
Yeah. So one thing that we mentioned, we didn't actually use, talking about this menu, this creative limitation menu. This is something that comes from my ebook, and we will include a link in the show notes so you can download this menu. So it gives us some options for creating your own limitations. And let's see, do you have yours up in front of you? Oh, there we go. Actually, I do. It's so it gives you some different categories, and so this is a way you'll choose 2 limitations. So if you want to work with limitations and you don't even know where to start, well, here's a menu. It's like, it's like you're ordering lunch. Doesn't matter if you necessarily pick the right thing. At some point, you just pick something and roll with it. So on the basic menu, there's different categories. There's dynamics, pitch, range, articulation, rhythm, and density, and several options within each one of them. So you'll choose 2 different limitations, and within the limitations, play the short improvisation like we were just doing. And as we were talking about playfulness, treating it as a musical game. So we may choose something from the, dynamics category. So it could be an improvisation that has a gradual crescendo throughout. Okay? And then from the rhythm category, a rhythmic ostinato, a repeated rhythm. So something that's repetitive rhythmically and gradually gets louder. And there's your limitation, and working with that and just kind of seeing what happens. And now, this brings back the other creative practices, right? Talking about experimentation and play, and set up an experiment and see if it works. And maybe it does. And if it doesn't, you may have to change your approach or change the parameters. And anyway, just wanted to give you that resource so you can start doing this. And it's really fun to do in groups as well.
And a couple suggestions I would add to it. One would be to record yourself and then consider trying the opposite of some of the limitations, or some of the things that you notice yourself doing a lot in your recordings. Consider trying the opposite, or at least something different. And I thought of that especially when you mentioned the ostinato. I find I spend a lot of time suggesting that people improvise and seeing what happens when I challenge people to improvise. And I notice often people don't repeat things very much. Like have you noticed this too, Steve? Because you're in different contexts than I am sometimes doing this, but often it's kind of like a run-on sentence as opposed to if you imagine something that has repetition. So sometimes structuring your whole improvisation around an ostinato or a drone, something that is quite consistent, can help with changing your thinking around that a bit.
Yeah, a lot of people, I ran out of ideas. What do I do? So I do a lot of work with folks on thematic improvisation, taking the theme and making some changes. Repetition, like you're talking about. And as I was playing earlier with conversation, call and response, especially teaching jazz and working with blues and other Black American music, this element of call and response. So I have people approach things conversationally, like being able to play a question phrase that goes up and respond with an answer, or have even like a preacher congregation kind of conversation back and forth. And that helps. It helps move away from just kind of the wandering noodles, which happens particularly on. Sometimes people are just worried about what scale. They're kind of randomly noodling on a scale, and it's not repetitive, it's not clear, and it's just wandering generality of something. So some of those things, yeah, same. I'm with you. You there.
And so to play with things that are less dense, so taking more space, playing less in general. So like playing things that repeat more, taking more space, playing more slowly can help just adjust the approach to it. And then another suggestion is to consider how other artistic disciplines would approach a creative menu. And I mean, and there are resources for other disciplines. There's language that movement artists use more often than musicians, and there's overlap there. And then there's places or ways in which that's very different. Or if someone was painting, how might they describe what they're doing or the limitations to what they're doing, and how can we showed some examples that were more theatrical, and so like how can we approach our creative discipline or our artistic practice in a way that has a different mindset than what's typical or idiomatic or standard or what immediately comes to mind for us.
Yeah. And I was just working with, I did a new student come over, like a young adult student who came over who'd worked a lot, and he was playing jazz but felt really trapped because he had learned a lot of, jazz phrases, what we call vocabulary or licks, that he could cut and paste something in the right spot that sounded cool. And he had memorized all of these phrases trying to learn like this vocabulary-based jazz approach. But he just felt like, it's always the same, or he was just not feeling that it was very intuitive, or, if he ran out of things to cut and paste, what to do. But, very skilled. And I was in a similar place when I showed up to music school. My teacher, Jerry Bergonzi, who I talk about a lot, just snapped me out of that, and I was like excited to work through the same thing with him, like through musical limitations. So we're playing this tune, and he it sounded very proficient and excellent and resembled jazz and all of that. I'm like, okay, now you're only going to play short phrases with short rests, like kind of choppy phrase. And he's like, oh, well, okay. And he was playing that, and suddenly he was like developing these themes and, still playing the tune. And then I had him do the opposite, like you're saying, long phrases and long rests. But the way he was playing, the long rest sounded very awkward and not musical. So like, well, how can you set up a long rest in this jazz context to not sound like that you're lost or your solo's over and someone else jumps in? And also, okay, play only eighth notes, which is, he was doing that anyway, so I didn't have to use that one. But I'm like, no eighth notes. And it's like, what other options are there? Dotted quarter notes. Wait, I could and suddenly, but he was doing, some made him uncomfortable, but then some things were like, that's something new. That was not something you had predetermined and pasted in, because he had all of these skills. But it's the limitations that will, I told him it's a pretty exciting place to be, because he got all these skills, and now it's time to like actually do the creative part. The limitations, and that's how I was introduced to it too. And then I brought it to some more of these approaches that are more open or not about a specific genre neutral or genre fluid. I don't know what we call it, but I came to it through the jazz tradition, and then backing into some other traditions, and just finding that the limitations, they're the ticket.
Yeah, for sure. Both limiting and expanding.
Yeah, exactly. Well, have fun experimenting and playing and working with these limitations. Mm-hmm. And we'll be doing some of these together. We're in the process of putting together a Discord community, and we want to have some of these prompts and exercises and connect other people together. playing and experimenting and sharing the process with one another. So stay tuned for that, and you can join us in some of these musical experiments.
Yeah. And my one last tip is to write down some of your own menu, because both in terms of creating a menu to go forward from, but also like sometimes once you start thinking of all these individual choices you're making, it can become clear that like there's a lot going on and there's a lot to think about. So sometimes like just like some little notes here and there of like kind of keeping track of what you're up to can help give some perspective on it. Because I think one of the powerful things about limitations is that it restricts the number of things we can think about, so then we can actually think about those things.
Yeah.
Because our brains are not designed to think of a lot of different things all at the same time.
Yeah.
They don't work that way. We actually have quite small memories, and we can jump around between things to some extent, but being able to kind of be within one limitation for a bit can be quite revealing. And so actually kind of journaling a bit for yourself to keep track of what limitations you are and aren't exploring can also be quite revealing and can be helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what, the menus that we're providing that can help. If you don't know where to start and even choosing something is overwhelming, well, grab something off our menu, but yeah, make your own. If you have an idea for other sets of limitations, for sure, go for it. Recording yourself's a good idea. We have a future episode on reflection. So kind of what's a healthy way to listen back and listen and observe, and then also figure out how to make musical decisions going forward, without getting super critical and beating yourself up. There's an art form to that. It's not easy, but
time helps.
Yeah.
Put a little distance between yourself sometimes.
Absolutely. And sometimes you'll definitely hear things that you didn't notice at the moment while playing. I'm sure we will too when we go back and listen to this episode and post. But anyway, I think we can leave it here. But yeah, connect with us, and you can download even more resources at infiniteimprovisation.com/podcast. Any final words?
Well, have fun. Let us know how it goes.